So I was making a game, but I quit. Almost. Let me explain. Hey guys, so it's been about 8 months since I last uploaded anything to YouTube. Long spans of time with no uploads isn't exactly out of the ordinary for game dev YouTubers, but the truth is, I wasn't really working on my game that much at all. When I first started showing my work on this game, I was working as a freelance developer with my own business on the side. But since my last devlog, I got a full-time job, so my time available to work on the game quickly dwindled away. But I could still work on the game in my free time, right? Well, yeah, I definitely could have done that, but I only touched the game a handful of times since the last upload. For a couple of weeks after, I actually worked on getting a character model animated into the game, along with some basic multiplayer functionality. These felt great because they really brought a sense of gravity to the game, like you weren't just a detached gun floating around. And I love developing vital pieces of the game like this. But there's one thing when developing the game that bogs me down, and that's the game plot itself. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. You're a person that makes bread and automates it. But I started this game purely out of interest in the automation and wiring and electronics part, not really in sticking to any storyline or focusing on the movement of objects. These things are great to have, but they're just not what interests me the most. And my interests are pretty important when I'm going to be the one seeing this thing through. I think I started working on the actual storyline / gameplay loop so that I would have a narrative to build around for making YouTube videos and making the game appealing to potential players. But from now on, I'm just going to be adding random things and making a sort of sandbox game, like I'd planned on originally. If that's not for you, then I totally understand. I definitely think that it'll let me have more fun and stick to development. Another thing is, making YouTube videos while developing doubles the work that needs to be done. For me at least. Getting footage of everything I'm doing and weaving it into a narrative is pretty time consuming. So going forward, I'm going to try and intentionally put the priority on production quality to the side, and just pump out devlogs more consistently. So like I was saying, right after the last video I started working on two things. One was re-adding a box dispensing machine. It wasn't too hard, but at first I was working on a much more complicated model that had a fancy box folding animation. This would be great to have eventually, but midway through making it I realized that it was going to take way more time to make than I was willing to put into it. There are more important things to be working on, so for now I settled with a very simple dispenser. The other thing was multiplayer. It may seem like it's a bit early in the game's development to be working on multiplayer, and I debated with myself about working on it this soon also. But with as many parts as there are going to be in the game, I think getting a solid multiplayer experience implemented early on is going to be better than trying to retrofit a multiplayer system in later. Like I alluded to earlier, I also worked on a character model. I'm not great at modeling organic things like people, so all I've been able to come up with for the player character so far is this low poly human. Down the line I'm planning on making the characters customizable, but for now this is what you're stuck with. Aside from modeling, there were a few big challenges that I had to overcome while preparing multiplayer. The first of these was getting the characters to look good while moving. I don't know about you, but when I play multiplayer games with friends, everything is much more fun when the characters feel alive and like someone is actually there with you. For now I'm using Unity's mechanism system and basic animations for the idle, run, strafe, and jump animations. The other challenge in implementing multiplayer is that I'm keeping the game physics-based. This means that there will always be lots of tiny movements of objects that are hard to predict far in advance. If we just constantly pipe through the location and rotation of each item from the server to the client, there would be a huge amount of bandwidth used, and things could get slow really quickly. To get around this, I'm setting the location of the items occasionally, along with the velocity of objects. This way, physics calculations are done on each player's computer, but every so often item locations will be reconciled with the position of the item on the server. For now, I'm going to be hiding the multiplayer functionality because I'm still in the early stages of getting it ready, but I wanted to show that I'm actually developing with multiplayer as a top priority in mind. Like I was saying in the first part of the video, I'm going to be leaning more into the electronic and wiring components of the game, because that's where my true passion is. So here is one of the first steps in that process. I've made some big improvements to placing wires and nodes. For one, you can see where you're fixing to place a wire node before you place it now. I'm using the same visuals that are used for placing other objects, so it should be pretty intuitive. When you hold the Alt key to use the wire node deletion mode, the highlighted sphere will switch to red. Another change is that you can now scroll the mouse wheel up and down while holding the control button to control the placement height for wire nodes. This will help because more complex wiring schemes will likely be easier by using 3 dimensions instead of all being on the ground. Next, I made the wiring node snap to a grid to make it easier to make designs line up and be more aesthetically pleasing and organized. I may allow the grid snapping to be turned off again later, but I have to think of the controls more. I hope these changes make creating things easier for players. Here are some other things that I added to the game. 7-segment digit display. I'm excited to introduce this first programmable display into the game. It should be useful for displaying calculations or just tallying up the items you baked, boxed, or shipped off. Each segment is individually controllable via the lead nodes on the back. I debated making the displays just have a single lead for each possible digit, but I figured it may be more fun to have more granular controls and leave the actual digit implementation to players. It also means you can use it to display some letters. A button. This is a simple but super necessary component. For now, there's just a button on a stand instead of one that can be placed on the ground or walls because it'll allow things to be controlled without stretching too much, since it's closer to eye level. Placement surfaces. This isn't related to wiring, but it's definitely a quality of life improvement. Before, anything that wasn't machinery or walls were being treated as objects that were just placed a certain distance in front of the player. But that made lining cookie dough up on the baking pan pretty inconvenient and unpredictable, because you would have to strategically drop cookie dough above the pan and hope that they landed in the position that you wanted. Now though, when you're looking at the pan, whatever you're placing will place near the surface. The distance placement system will still be used when you're not looking at a placement surface. You can now change the items you're using by scrolling the mouse wheel. This will cycle through the items in your inventory hotbar so you don't have to press a number key, and it should be a much better experience. This is kind of the standard in games nowadays, so I'm not sure why it took me so long to notice that it was missing. One thing to watch out for though, if you have cookie dough on the baking pan and scroll to the next item, the cookie dough will disappear when you come back to it. This is because right now what actually happens when you change items is that a new instance of that item is made and placed in your hands, so there's no storage of what's on the baking pan. I'll be thinking of what to do in that case and implement a solution soon. Sound. I finally added sound to the game for the first time. The first sound I added was a click for the button stand. Then I just modified its sound a bit and placed it on the dial. Then I did that again and used it for the switch. So this is what those sound like. Does it sound like I just mouthed the sounds into my phone mic and edited them? Because that's what I did. I wanted to see if you could tell before I told you. I keep replaying them to try and determine if they sound really strange or I'm just overthinking it because I know how they were made. Anyway, having sound in the game definitely feels good. Inverse kinematics. Along with the characters that I added to the game, I used inverse kinematics to make the player convincingly hold items. So when you're holding the wire tool, baking pan, or anything else, your player will actually hold it while running around. This was my first time working with inverse kinematics, and I really like the way it looks so far. What do you think? Terrain detail occlusion. Before, when you placed an item on the ground, grass from the terrain would still clip through it and be visible. Now though, I'm calculating the overlapping grass coordinates and removing the grass from the spots that you place down a floor. As you may have noticed throughout the video, this has allowed me to increase the amount of grass again, and I think it looks better now, but I keep flipping back and forth on how much grass to have on the ground. The visuals of the game are constantly changing and are always going to be a work in progress. As for ideas of what to add next, I'm wanting to add wires passing through walls, wireless transmitters, simpler toggle components, and more. There's no shortage of ideas to work on, I just have to pick what to prioritize next. What electronic components do you think I should add? Please let me know your ideas in the comments. I really enjoy reading what you all think. Anyways, the game is available in its super early state for Patreon supporters. I really appreciate the support and it goes to the making of the game. Thank you all for watching, commenting, and subscribing. It really means a lot to me. See you next time.